Okay, welcome to my talk. It's all about certificates and encryption. As mentioned, I am a data engineer, or an engineer actually. I prefer that title as well. If I'm not working or doing something with computers, you can find me on that boat. That's in the background. But first things first, there are a lot of simplifications in place during this talk. Because the math behind encryption and everything that has to do with it, you should have attended the data science track yesterday and I'm happy I'm not presenting that day, because all those guys that were sitting there, they probably understand what it's actually about. So I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a cryptographer, I'm just telling this story because a lot of people always say, yeah, it's hard doing certificates and I don't know actually exactly what's going on. People tend to forget or ignore it. Yeah, that's somebody at the ops department, he's putting in some certificates somewhere and therefore we have secure connections and end of story. And the entire team is like, yeah, who cares? In general, that's if I look here and see the reactions, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, sounds about give or take right. But actually, if you look into it, it's actually quite fun. There's a lot of stuff going behind the scenes that if you understand it a little bit, it's actually quite interesting. Okay, but first let's talk about encryption and cryptography and in general. It's quite old, 60 BC. Julius Caesar started with encryption, and probably all of you who went to lower school until 12, 13, you probably exchange secret messages with your friends, just shifting a few characters and writing them down. That was actually invented 60 years before Christ, and that was what Julius Caesar did. That was pen and paper that evolved just a little bit during the Middle Ages. Nothing really was done in that time, but it actually exploded just before and during the Second World War. And one of the examples is the best known example is the Enigma machine. I think everybody knows what we're talking about. That's this thingy, but it's still all mechanical. Well, there are a few wires here, but it's just a battery and a few dials, and that's all that's to it. It started just in the 60s or 70s. That's the first time encryption and things like that started being done on a computer. And I'm like, that can be a lot faster. So that's the start of computerized cryptography. I still think it's a difficult word. A few things that you need to understand and what the basic concept of them is. A cipher, and there are two different spellings. It's probably something UK-US thingy. I don't know why they changed that, but a cipher is a piece of data that is encrypted. You cannot read that as plain text. You've got a key, and related to that one is the key size. That is a magical number that you use to encrypt the data, so you hide the actual information. Two other things, you got symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. The difference is that with asymmetric encryption, you got two parts. Everybody has some information, but you have some private information as well. We call it the public-private key encryption. That is one that is generally known. That's a form of asymmetric encryption. If you actually have a secure connection, 9 out of 10 times it's a symmetric encryption. You have just one key, and both parties know that single key. And they do that mainly because of speed. There are quite a few implementations. I just written down a few of them. Some of you might recognize RSA. It's probably recognized. DES is a very old standard that was invented in the late 70s. MD5 AES, which is still used quite a lot. Diffie Hellman is one of the most essential mathematical inventions for cryptography. And the latest version, the elliptic curve. And another thing that is mostly forgotten are random numbers. Because encryption has a lot to do with numbers, and especially big, very large random numbers. So we got pseudo-random number generators. And they say pseudo because it's not really random. But when you're doing cryptography, it's not going to work. You need that one. And it's a cryptographic secure random numbers. Because most attacks and problems that exist on attacks on secure data can be cracked because the random number is not random. Maybe some of you guys know the early Wi-Fi encryption, the WEP encryption. Why was that cracked? Because the number they used to create the key wasn't random. You just needed, I believe in the last iteration of that tool, just 5,000 packets over your Wi-Fi network, and they knew your password. So it's hard to create random numbers, and the flaws in them are key to a lot of attacks. So companies put a lot of effort in generating net random numbers. And the coolest example I could find about a random number generator is LavaRand. It's in Cloudflare. And this is their random number generator. There's just a bunch of Java lamps. And what they do with this random number generator, they take a picture of it, and you just take the bits. And those lamps are always different. And that's their basis for their random number generator. And I believe they have about 5 or 6 placed all over the world to generate the random numbers. And there are a lot of other examples that they use to create a randomness from somewhere. I've just heard another company is using a wind meter and direction as input for a random number. Okay, that was just the introduction. We'll first start with the RSA algorithm. Was published in 1977, so it's fairly recent, I would say. The name comes from the inventors, just three mathematicians. So, again. And actually, the essence of their paper is if you have a large prime numbers and you do a few multiplications with them, it's very hard to figure out what the original numbers were. So if I got two random numbers, do some multiplications, and then I'm gonna give you the number, what was the original numbers that I used to create the other big number? This is the math part I'm not going to discuss into detail, but what RSA says, you take two large prime numbers, P and Q, you multiply them, and that is part of the public key. Just a big number. Then you calculate phi, that's P minus 1 multiplied by Q minus 1, and you choose a number E, which is coprime. And a coprime is a common divisor for two numbers. It's a lot of math. If you really want to go into that one, please look it up on the internet. I tried reading the assertions on what it actually is, and in general, I fell asleep after 3 pages. Because it's very hard to do, but it's just a greatest common divider of the other numbers. You do a modulo calculation to make it even harder, because everybody knows what a modulo division is. We're using it every day on our clock, because we got 24 hours in a day, but the number counter still goes on, but it's never bigger than 24. That makes it even harder to calculate, or to get back. And you say, okay, I've got a public part, the N and the E part, as mentioned here, and the other part I keep private. That's my private key, and you really need to keep that one private. This is just a very quick example of it. I take two random numbers. In this case, I picked 61 and 53. So my n is 3,233. Calculate the phi, which is not a large number. I find the coprime, which is more of a bit of guessing. So yeah, I'll take this one. You take the modulo. Okay, and then when you've done all this, you get the e, which was calculated here, the coprime. The number n, that's just the multiplication of the two prime numbers. That's your public key part. And the d and the n is the private key part. So that's actually four numbers. Two you share and the other two you keep private. And if you want to encrypt something, you say, okay, we take the character A, which is in ASCII is 65. I take that to the power E, which is 17, and do the modulo of number n. And then I get 2,790. If I want to go back, I can do the same trick, taking this number with the d I have, do it to the power as well, and modulo of n, and I get the same number back. And that's what, within RSA, what they published and what they figured out, that this is a fairly simple formula. But if you just have these two numbers and that number, you still don't have a clue on how to get to the original. And that's what it's all about. But you have to keep your private key private. And that's, a few companies have lost their private key to their certificates. And there was one in the Netherlands, and once it got out that public key, their private key was shared with quite a bit of the world, 3 weeks later, they were not there anymore. Because every customer ran away. The next, very important part, that was the basis of the encryption that we use now is Diffie Hellman. Because if you want to do encryption and you want to do it quickly, you want to use symmetric encryption. But I'm here, you're over there, and there's a public line in between. How am I going to tell you what that number is? Well, Diffie and Hellman figured out a way to do that. And they did it in 76, so just before RSA. So it's the simplest explanation I can find, and I do agree with a lot of other people that use this example as well. It's just by using colors. We're saying, okay, we got a common part, and we just yell that to each other. It's yellow. And I say, well, I like, what is it, on this orange brownish color, that's my private color, and some greenish. We mix that one, we send it across the street, and we send that color, and we multiply it with our own color again. So this part here is the multiplication of yellow with my own private color and his private color. And if you do that both sides, that number is the same. Cool. But he doesn't know what my color was. And there's no way to get back. Or at least it's very hard. The implementation, we just use another prime number, which they keep coming back, and another number they call the primitive root modulo p. If you look that up, be prepared to read a large document. But in essence, it's a very specific number that if you take it to a power, so for example, the number 2 is a primitive root of 5. Because if you take 2 to the power 0, you get 1. 1 modulo 5 equals 1. You take 2 to the power 1 is 2. 2 modulo 5 is 2, and so on and so on. But when you get to 2 to the power 4, which is 16, and you do 16 modulo 5, you get 1 again. And if you do that, if you're going to repeat that on continuously, so 2 to the 5th, 2 to the 6th, that should be 8. When you take 2 to the 8th, modulo 5, it's again 1. So that number repeats itself. That's the primitive root. So if you do that here, you just take those two numbers. A and B are some random numbers. Therefore, the random number generator is so important. You calculate those. You send it over the public transport. And so in this case, the numbers again. Two private numbers. You continue calculating those numbers on and on and on. And at the end, you'll see that both have 9 as being the secret key. So if I want to send a message, or the letter A again, I multiply it by 9, send it over the line. He knows, oh, I just have to divide it by 9. And nobody else has a clue what it should have been. And I take now the number 9, so it's fairly easy to figure out what the number was. But if you take the random numbers that I'll actually use, they're, 120 characters long. So it's quite a big number. This is the actual proof that it's true. People started working with it, and we're doing more and more encryption. Computers get a lot more powerful, so there's a lot more possibility to, because Diffie Hellman can be cracked. It's just a formula. You can do the reverse, but you need a lot of processing power. But computers are getting that big. They say, that can be cracked. So we figured out something else. This is another one that's, if you go into the maths, it's very hard to understand, but it's an elliptic curve, and it's the orange line you see here. And there's a trick in mathematics that if you take a point on this graph, you can, if you take the tangent of it, you come to another point, and from that one, you take a line down to that point, you take the tangent again, and you can move around on this graph. But the fun part is, if you do this, that point multiplied is that point. So if you take point G times G, you get here. And you can do that over and over again. And then it makes it very hard to go back to the original point, because in the encryption part, you need the original point. And it's just a mathematical trick. The funniest part is that almost everybody is using the same curve. And that's the formula that's stated there. It's x to the third times plus 48,622 times x squared. Everybody's using that. There are a few other curves that are known to be correct. Because if you take a very simple graph, they say it's possible to do it. And the funny part is there's no actual mathematical proof that you're not able to get back to that point if you did that multiplication. And you don't know the times it has been calculated. But there's no proof for it. And actually, if you want to exchange that value, it's the same as Diffie Hellman. Because you just exchange the G point. We both take a random number again, multiply it, and we do at our own location, we do the same thing. Because you can say A times B times G is the same as B times A times G, which just is plain math. You can change the location of the values. And now you might ask, why did they use elliptical curve Diffie Hellman? It's all about the size, because the bigger your symmetric key size is, the harder it is to crack. And you see, if I want to have the highest level of symmetric key size, which is 256, if you want to do that with just RSA, you need a key size of 15,360 bits, which is large. If you want to compute that on your phone, it's not going to happen. Then you're just going to open a website, you open your phone, Google it, or Safari, whatever. You go to the website and say, yeah, I want a secure connection. And then it says, well, will be right back. But you can go outside the take a smoke, grab a cup of coffee, maybe lunch, and then your phone will say, yes, I'm ready for you. So that's the reason why they want to reduce the size of the key. And you can see here, if you do elliptic curve, you just need 512 bits to get the same level of security. Okay, next part. So we now have the public-private key part. We have a way to exchange a symmetric key securely to each other. But we still want to encrypt the data. And the most commonly used is IAS, Advanced Encryption Standard, which is a name that came out of the US with the institute there. But actually it's invented by a few Belgian guys, and mainly Mr. Rijndal. And it's what they call a block cipher. So it just doesn't take a single character, it takes a bunch of characters and encodes that into something secret. You can work with block sizes 128, 192, and 256. They're working on one that does 512 bytes, but of bits I have never seen, but they're still working on that. I'm not going into a lot of detail about this one because it's quite complex. But the thing is, you have a block of data, you take 256 bits of that data, you look up in a table based on the symmetric key you have, and you do an XOR with that one, and then you start switching rows and bytes and doing XORs on that one. And the cool part about this one, if you implement it correctly, of course, and you have encrypted data, if you want to go back, you just go that way again. Just by reshifting all the bytes again. And then you get the original text back. And it's very fast, because XOR operators or shift operators within a computer or within a CPU is one of the easiest thing you can do. It's one of the core multiplication. It's the same thing, you just shift one bit. Okay. Excuse me. Clear on this part. So we got three things. We got the RSA, public-private key. We got the Diffie Hellman technique to exchange a secret number privately. And we have AES in which we can encrypt data. So that's all cool, but the talk is about certificates. I haven't mentioned them anywhere yet. Because that's what we're here for. If you go to Wikipedia, you get this long list of text. I'm not going to read it to you. Go look it up sometime on Wikipedia. But it says it's a public key certificate. So, hey, public key. I just explained the RSA. There's a public key in it. And another thing that I want to mention is this word. After this talk, if you use that word and your colleague is sitting next to you, he can take the clue bat and hit you. Because SSL has been deprecated since 2015. And everybody's still using it. I don't know why. It's kind of stuck, I think. But actually, when you're opening your browser and you're doing HTTPS, you're setting up a TLS connection. So in other words, a certificate is nothing more than the public part of an RSA key pair and some additional information, and that I'm getting there now. This is all that's into a certificate. It's X.509 format. And the most important part is actually this part, the parameters that are used to create the signature of that message. This is the signature itself. The subject, every certificate has a name. If you open your browser and you look, give me the details, every certificate has a name. And another thing that is used quite a lot, and that's also necessary, is the extension part. Because a certificate is issued to an identity or /organization that is stored in there, but you also need to provide information, okay, which website am I applicable to? Because in a certificate, there's always in the extensions there, in general, it's just the DNS names. and that DNS name should match the host that you're visiting, because a check can be done on that part. Okay, this is how it looks. But we're talking about trust. Why do I accept certificate X and I say, yes, my connection is secure and I trust who's on the other side? It all has to do with CAs. And a CA is nothing more than a party that we all agree to. If you say that I'm Peter, and you say, yeah, sure, I trust you, there are no questions that I'll ask anymore. Same as when you come in here into the door and you show your badge, that's something similar. Because the security guard in front of the door trusts the Jay and the Beach organization that they gave you that honestly. We've got root CAs, top-level CAs, intermediate CAs, and those are the parties that we trust. So I request a certificate from an issuer, and what this issuer does, it creates your format, it signs it with its own private key. So if I go a little bit back, the certificate, this part that you see here from this curly blaze onto that one, that's the certificate part. There's nothing in it that you don't want. No, I'll skip that part. But they calculate a hash code over this part, and that hash code is encrypted with the private key of the issuer. So when my certificate arrives at your browser, you know, I trust the issuer. Cool. But I can verify that hash because I can calculate that hash myself. So if I take the data part, I extract that, I'll have a short demo on that one. You can extract that, calculate the hash, but you can also take the original certificate that was received, take that signature out of it, decode it by means of the public key that the issuer has, and those two values should be the same. If those two values are the same, you're like, yeah, he says who he is, he says. Okay, a little demo. How am I on time? Yeah. I should go there. I hit chat. Which one? Yeah. Is it readable? Yes. Cool. Now I have to think which one I should do. Yeah. I scripted this out because the commands are a little bit too long to keep in my head. Okay, first thing, we're going to connect to my company website, and we're using OpenSSL, which is, if you're using any kind of operating system, I'm not sure if Windows has OpenSSL by default, but Linux, OS X, they all have this as a standard. And with this, you just connect to a website. So I connect to my company's website on the HTTPS port. And you see, I get a lot of information. I get some certificate data. I want to go to the top. And here it says, okay, the DataWorks certificate, that's this part, is issued by Let's Encrypt. Okay, cool. Here it shows the certificate itself. It shows the intermediate certificate from Let's Encrypt. Another one. And here you can actually see it. The same is the subject, the name of the certificate is dataworks.nl. And it was issued by Let's Encrypt. You can see that here that the signing request is done with a SHA-256. And the signature type is elliptic curve DSA algorithm. And the this number, if you paid attention, if I go back a few slides, the graph that I show you, the elliptic curve, that's this one. That's the one they use. We're going, the connection is TLS 1.3, which is the latest version. So it's using AES as an encryption, 128 bits. I'm not going into this part because it's just a variation on AES. But AES is a little bit easier to explain the concepts of. Session ID, some other stuff that you like, yeah, sure, whatever. The next part is, I'm going to, with OpenSSL, I'm going to extract the issuer, just to be sure, because I already showed you that it is Let's Encrypt. In this part, I'm taking out the public key of that certificate. Okay, cool. This is the public key. It's a base 64 encoded string that's within the certificate. And this one is still, all right, this is the really long one. This is why I scripted this, because you can imagine that it's quite hard to get all the options in there. I want it in text format. I want no crazy extra output, some certificate options. I don't want to check the validity. I don't want the serial number. Yeah, there are all kinds of things, but this part is the most important part. I want the signature. This is the signature hex encoded. Underwater, I do a few other tricks. In this part, I'm extracting the top part of the certificate and store that in a binary. And this is the actual decrypting of the... so here at the bottom line, you see this is the signature that I just calculated. And here I'm taking just the certificate and taking out the signature that was stored in there. Sorry, I need another one. And here you can see that the number here is the same as that one. Okay, this one is capitalized and this one is not, but that number is the same. So what I did here, I took the certificate, I calculated the hash, the SHA-256 on that part. I took out the signature that was provided within the certificate, used the public key of the issuer to decrypt that one, and yes, they're the same. And each time you open a website, this will be done, just to verify that that the certificate is valid. Okay, now I go back to the presentation. No. If you want to, well, I'll just show it. Now I showed it to you, I'll show it to you. OpenSSL is the tool to go to. I go to the documentation. There's a lot on this one I wanted. This is the main page. If you go to the latest version and you just take the command part, this is all you can do with OpenSSL. And these are the top level commands. So if you want to have fun with SSL connections, you need to read this stuff. Better yet, just Google it. Because most things are explained quite well on the internet. Okay, that was my demo. Okay, so now we know about RSA. We know about how we exchange a private key. We know something, the basics of encryption. We know now how a certificate is verified on client side. But this is actually what's going on underneath, the TLS handshake. This is how the protocol works in setting up a secure connection. And I have to point out, this is version 1.3. It's mostly a lot of simplifications in that. So if a client connects to a secure an endpoint he assumes is secure, it says, hi, here is something that I support. I can do this, that, and that, and that. And it also sends the initial part of the key. So when I talked about Diffie Hellman, the initial phase is that you exchange a shared part of the shared secret. That's done at the first contact that is being made to the other server. It's just to make it more efficient. The server says, okay, cool, hi back. And it says, okay, I've chosen this way to encrypt the data. This is my part of the secret key. And additionally, I set a signature over all the data that has already been sent. It's just to verify, the client can then really verify, oh yeah, it's you that was sending it. So there's no man in the middle possible in this sense. It's finished, and the first call you do is done by means of encrypted data. That's all that's to it. But you needed to know the first part, because once it receives the client hello and the certificate, it will verify the certificate. The client also does the first part of the Diffie Hellman to exchange the shared private symmetric key. The server, when it receives that, it verifies the certificate, does the other part, calculation on the private key part, and sends it back. And then you just have a secure connection, which is encrypted probably by AES or maybe some other versions of it. There are a few variations of it. By head, I say that TLS 1.3, you only have 5 choices, give or take. Could be 6, I'm not entirely sure. Well, it's 4, actually. I pointed it out here. These are the possibilities that you can send. And I hear a lot of people about certificates. It's hard, yeah, I want to do MTLS. It's the same story. The only thing that changes is that the server here sends one back as well. So the client can actually verify, yeah, I'm talking to you, but the server does the same thing to the client. That's all that's to MTLS. There's just an additional certificate that's being sent. And verified, of course, but... I had slides on that one. Cool. So now you know all about certificates and encryption. Well, the basics then. Before we start with the questions, I got a question for you. Did anybody notice the gimmick in the presentation?
I have a question. If you really need to issue a lot of certificates, and then you have to keep your private key private,
yes,
but then you still need to use it quite often every time you need to sign new certificates.
Yes.
Where do you put that key? Because you don't want to have that in a...
Yeah, that's a very cute question. You either put it on a floppy disk or a USB and put it in a safe. That's one place to store it and take it out when you need to sign certificates. In general, you got something called a PKI infrastructure, and that will take care of a lot of those things in there. Keeping the private key secure. You can just send a certificate signing request to that PKI and it will sign that for you. But yes, still, if you have access to the private key, your certificates are useless. And that's always a pain in the butt. So that's why all those companies that issue certificates are very paranoid about their private key. Okay, so what the example I gave of the Dutch company that more or less put that one on the internet, they were out of business in 3 weeks. And a big discussion with Google, but come back to that later if you want to.
Other questions?
Basically, one of the question I have is the CA, they have a private key.
Yes.
They keep using that all the time to sign a new certificate, to issue new certificates.
Yes.
Do they at some point have to renew, or they have any policy to renew the private key, or they keep that forever?
They have to replace it at a certain point in time because their certificates that they're using, the CA certificate, that will expire at some point in time as well. So you need a new one.
And what happened to the certificate they have already issued? All of them had to be replaced as well?
No, if you have a certificate, for example, the certificate of my root CA or my signing CA expires tomorrow. And it signs a certificate for me today, which is valid for a year. That certificate will be valid for a year.
So a follow-on question to that, just because I've been thinking about it. The encryption key itself, you have a private key, that doesn't expire. It's just the certificate mechanism is where the expiration happens.
Yeah.
So you can keep a private key for 100 years if you want.
If you want to, yeah.
If you can keep it private.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the certificate itself expires. Guessed it correctly.